Prince Harry just did something so breathtakingly hypocritical that even his most devoted defenders are struggling to spin it. The man who spent years systematically dismantling the British monarchy on global television has released a deeply emotional Remembrance Day letter preaching about British values, service, loyalty, and sacrifice. Yes, you read that correctly. The same Harry who sat beside Oprah Winfrey and lobbed grenades at his family is now lecturing the nation about duty and remembrance from his mansion in Montecito, California. The letter dropped this week, and within seconds, Brits were absolutely shredding it across social media. Because here is what makes this so staggering. This is the man who watched his wife perform an exaggerated, mocking curtsy to his grandmother on their Netflix documentary. The man who compared his royal life to a prison and the institution to a cult. The man who walked away from his service to chase multi-million-dollar streaming deals. And now he has the nerve to write about honoring those who chose to serve, knowing the cost. The timing could not be more transparent. Everything in Harry's life is collapsing. His Netflix projects flopped spectacularly. Heart of Invictus barely registered a pulse. His wife is more focused on her lifestyle brand and cinnamon stick tea tutorials than their actual family. Reports are surfacing about tensions in the marriage, social media battles, and a man who seems utterly lost without his royal identity. So what does Harry do? He wraps himself in the Union Jack and starts preaching about British values to a country he abandoned 5 years ago. Royal watchers are furious because the hypocrisy is not subtle. It is glaring, obvious, and almost offensive in its transparency. Sources close to the palace suggest this letter was crafted by his increasingly desperate PR team, trying desperately to rehabilitate an image that has been shattered beyond repair. But here is the problem. Every single line Harry wrote contradicts his own actions. Every word about loyalty rings hollow when you remember how he treated his dying grandfather and grieving grandmother. Every phrase about service feels like a slap in the face to the institution he voluntarily deserted. The British public is not stupid. They watched him trash his family for profit. They saw him prioritize Hollywood over heritage. They witnessed the spectacle of a man who had everything throwing it all away and then blaming everyone else for his choices. And now he wants to lecture them about remembrance and sacrifice. The audacity is genuinely staggering. But what makes this even more disturbing is that Harry might actually believe his own words. He might genuinely not see the contradiction. And that raises an even darker question about what is really happening behind closed doors in Montecito. Because this letter is not just hypocritical, it is a window into a man who seems to have completely lost touch with reality. Let's break down exactly what Harry wrote, because the opening lines alone are enough to make anyone who has been paying attention absolutely furious. Harry begins his letter with this gem. Every November, the world for a moment grows quieter. We pause together to remember. Remembrance has never been about glorifying war. It's about recognizing the cost, the lives changed forever, and the lessons paid for through unimaginable sacrifice. Beautiful words, right? Except they are coming from a man who walked away from his duty in January 2020 specifically because he did not want to recognize the cost anymore. He wanted the glamour without the sacrifice. He wanted the titles without the responsibility. He wanted to be half in, half out, cherry-picking the fun parts of royalty while ditching everything that required actual service. And when the Queen, his own grandmother, firmly said no, that is not how this works, he threw a tantrum that lasted 4 years and counting. Harry goes on to write about honoring those who, knowing the cost, still chose to serve. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Because Harry knew the cost, he was born into service. He understood from birth what was expected of him. And unlike the soldiers he claims to honor, Harry had every privilege imaginable. He had wealth, protection, status, and a platform most people could only dream of, and he still walked away. Not because he was wounded in battle, not because he was forced out, but because he wanted to make money off his family's name, while simultaneously destroying their reputation. Sources close to the palace suggest this letter was not Harry's own work. The language is too polished, too carefully crafted. This has PR fingerprints all over it. Word on the street is that Harry's team is in full panic mode, desperately trying to salvage whatever shred of credibility he has left, because everything else has failed. The Spotify deal collapsed. The Netflix content bombed. His book Spare might have sold copies, but it destroyed his relationships. And now, with Meghan laser-focused on her lifestyle brand and barely acknowledging him in public, Harry is clinging to the one thing he thinks still gives him value: his military service and his British identity. But here is what Harry does not seem to understand. You cannot spend years attacking an institution and then suddenly claim to represent its values when it is convenient for you. You cannot mock your grandmother's memory with that disgusting curtsy recreation and then lecture people about respect and remembrance. You cannot abandon your post and then preach about duty. The British public sees right through it. Veterans groups are calling it out. Even casual observers are rolling their eyes at the sheer audacity, because this is not remembrance. This is rebranding, and it is failing spectacularly. Now here is where Harry's letter takes an absolutely bizarre turn that left everyone scratching their heads. In a Remembrance Day message supposedly honoring British veterans and British values, Harry suddenly pivots to talking about Ukraine. Yes, you read that correctly. He writes about being invited to Ukraine earlier this year to visit the Superhuman Center, spending time with men and women rebuilding their lives after devastating injuries. He goes on about their resilience, their determination, their bravery. All very noble, right? Except this is supposed to be a letter to the British people about British Remembrance Day, honoring British service members. Why on earth is he making it about Ukrainians? Royal watchers are baffled by this choice, but insiders suggest it reveals something much darker about Harry's current mental state. He is desperately searching for any cause, any connection, any story that makes him seem relevant and heroic. He cannot talk authentically about his own service because his tour in Afghanistan was largely spent protected in bunkers playing video games. So he latches onto other people's genuine suffering and bravery to give himself credibility by association. Then Harry writes something that is almost laughable in its desperation. There is a similar stoic spirit of self-deprecation and humor in Ukrainians that I recognize more than any other in us Brits. He is literally writing to British people, telling them that Ukrainians remind him of Britishness, in a letter that is supposed to be about honoring British sacrifice. The tone deafness is staggering. Imagine being a British veteran, struggling with injuries or trauma from your service, reading this letter where Harry essentially says the Ukrainians he met embody British values better than actual Brits. Sources close to royal circles suggest this Ukraine obsession is part of Harry's larger pattern of appropriating other people's stories because he has none of his own worth telling. He showed up for a photo opportunity at a rehabilitation center, spent a few hours there, and now he is using their trauma as emotional currency in his desperate attempt to seem meaningful. It is exploitative, and veterans groups are not impressed. They see through the calculated nature of this reference. Harry is not honoring Ukrainian bravery out of genuine respect. He is using it as a shield against criticism and as proof that he still cares about military issues. But here is the brutal truth. British service members do not need Harry flying to Ukraine for photo ops to prove he cares. They needed him to stay in his role, fulfill his duties, and support military charities from within the institution instead of blowing it all up for Netflix money. They needed him to show up for his grandmother instead of staging paparazzi walks in Montecito. The Ukraine detour in this letter is not compassion. It is deflection, and it is transparent, calculated, and frankly insulting to everyone who has actually served without needing constant validation and PR rehabilitation. Now buckle up, because this is where Harry's letter reaches levels of hypocrisy that are almost impressive in their audacity. He writes, "Though currently I may live in the United States, Britain is and has and always will be the country I proudly served and fought for." Let that sink in for a moment. This is the same man who spent years systematically dismantling the British monarchy brick by brick on every platform that would pay him. Let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we? Harry sat beside Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 and launched accusations of racism against his family. He compared royal life to being trapped in a zoo. He suggested his family was jealous of Meghan. He implied they were cold, uncaring, and complicit in driving his wife to suicidal thoughts without offering help. Then came the Netflix documentary, where Meghan performed that grotesque curtsy mocking his grandmother, where they positioned themselves as victims of a brutal, outdated institution, where they painted Britain itself as backwards and prejudiced. And we cannot forget the book, Spare Repow, Harry's memoir, where he detailed private conversations, exposed family tensions, and revealed intimate moments that should have stayed within the family. He wrote about physical altercations with William. He shared details about his father's parenting. He disclosed private phone calls with his grandmother. All of it published, sold, and promoted for profit. That is what Harry considers proudly serving Britain, selling out his family's privacy for a multi-million-dollar book deal. Royal watchers are absolutely livid because Harry's definition of loving Britain seems to involve profiting from its destruction. He claims Britain will always be his country, but his actions suggest he views it more as a brand to exploit when convenient and attack when profitable. Palace insiders whisper that King Charles is under increasing pressure to strip Harry's titles entirely because this charade has gone on far too long. Harry is walking around cosplaying as a royal, using his Duke of Sussex title, while simultaneously undermining everything the institution stands for. But here is where it gets even more insulting. Harry writes about the banter of the mess, the clubhouse, the pub, the stands, and claims those are the things that make us British. I make no apology for it. I love it. Really, Harry? Really? Because your actions suggest otherwise. You abandoned that life. You walked away from the mess, the camaraderie, the duty. You chose Montecito mansions over British pubs. You picked Hollywood parties over regimental gatherings. And now you have the audacity to write nostalgically about British culture as if you are some exiled patriot forced away against your will. The truth is much simpler and much more damning. Harry loved Britain when it served him. He loved being a prince when it meant status and attention. But the moment the institution required sacrifice, duty, and putting others first, He bolted, and now, with his American dreams crumbling, he is trying to crawl back into British identity without acknowledging the damage he caused. And right on cue, Harry cannot help himself. In a letter that is supposed to be about honoring all veterans and remembering the fallen, he writes, "You need only to spend a few hours at the Invictus Games to feel it." There it is, the inevitable pivot to make everything about himself and his one claim to legitimacy. Harry's entire identity has become so wrapped up in the Invictus Games that he genuinely cannot write about military service without centering himself in the narrative. Now let's be clear about something that rarely gets acknowledged. Yes, Harry founded the Invictus Games. Yes, it is a good organization that helps wounded veterans, but the way Harry has weaponized it as his sole source of validation has become genuinely disturbing. He acts as though Invictus is the only organization on Earth supporting wounded warriors. He behaves as if his contribution to military causes is somehow more significant than people who have actually seen real combat and made real sacrifices. Here is what most people do not know or have conveniently forgotten. Harry's tour in Afghanistan was heavily protected and largely ceremonial. He spent most of his time in secure bunkers. Reports from fellow soldiers suggest he was playing video games more than engaging in actual combat operations. He was kept safe specifically because of who he was. His service, while technically valid, was nowhere near the frontline experience he loves to imply. Yet he has built an entire identity around being this military hero who deeply understands veteran suffering. Sources close to the Invictus Games organization suggest something even more troubling. Insiders whisper that Harry has become so emotionally dependent on the games that he sometimes appropriates the stories of actual wounded veterans as if they were his own experiences. He hears their trauma, their struggles, their triumphs, and then speaks about military service with an authority he has not actually earned. It is a form of stolen valor, except he is stealing credibility rather than medals. And here is the kicker. Harry writes about Invictus showing that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off, but his service absolutely did end when his uniform came off. He walked away, he quit. He abandoned his military appointments, his honorary titles, and his duties. The veterans at Invictus continue serving their communities, supporting each other, and living with the consequences of their sacrifice. Harry moved to California, signed Netflix deals, and complained about his privileged life on international television. The obsession with Invictus has become Harry's security blanket. It is the one thing he can point to and say, "See, I still matter, I still contribute." But the reality is becoming increasingly clear. Harry needs Invictus far more than Invictus needs Harry. He has attached his entire sense of purpose to this organization because everything else in his life is falling apart. His marriage is reportedly strained, his career is in shambles, his family relationships are destroyed, so he clings to Invictus like a drowning man clinging to driftwood, desperately hoping it will keep him afloat. Now prepare yourself for what might be the most painful example of Harry's staggering lack of self-awareness. He writes, "In my capacity as global ambassador, this week I wrote to families from Scotty's Little Soldiers, a UK charity supporting children of Britain's fallen heroes. Every year I'm moved by their strength. Sons and daughters who wear yellow and black scarves in honor of their parents. They don't march with bitterness but with love and pride. They carry forward their parents' legacy of service." Let that sink in for a moment. Harry is writing to children who lost their parents in military service, praising them for carrying forward a legacy of duty and honor. This is the same Harry who voluntarily walked away from his own family legacy, who abandoned his grandmother in her final years, who caused her immense pain and stress during a period when she was already grieving the loss of Prince Philip, who could not even be bothered to show up for tea time when the Queen had a birthday cake waiting for his daughter Lilibet. According to royal biographer Robert Jobson, the Queen's favorite time of day was tea time. She looked forward to it. She prepared for Harry, Meghan, and Lilibet to join her. She had a cake ready for her great-granddaughter, and Harry and Meghan never showed up. They did not call, they did not apologize, they just left an elderly woman waiting, disappointed in what would be one of her final opportunities to meet her great-grandchild. That is the man now lecturing about honoring family legacies and showing respect. But the hypocrisy gets even worse. Harry writes, "When one person serves, the whole family serves, and when one falls, the whole community feels that loss." Does he genuinely not see the irony? When Harry was a working royal, his entire family was serving. The Queen, Prince Philip, Charles, William, Catherine, they were all fulfilling their duties, supporting each other, carrying the weight of the institution together. And then Harry fell. He walked away, he abandoned his post, and the entire family felt that loss. The Queen had to strip him of his military titles. Prince Philip reportedly felt betrayed and furious. Charles had to navigate the public relations nightmare of his son trashing the family on television. William lost his brother and closest confidant. The entire institution had to absorb the damage Harry caused. They felt the loss of what Harry could have been, what he should have been, if he had just honored his commitments. Royal insiders suggest this letter to Scotty's little soldiers is particularly galling to palace staff who watched the Queen's heartbreak firsthand. Here is Harry praising children for honoring their parents' sacrifice, while he showed his own grandparents nothing but contempt and betrayal. The children of fallen soldiers show more maturity, grace, and understanding of duty than a 39-year-old prince who had every advantage and threw it all away. Now we arrive at what might be the most infuriating part of Harry's entire letter. He writes, "Remembrance isn't confined to one weekend in November. It's a lifelong commitment to empathy, gratitude, and action. To be kinder, more united, and braver in protecting those who came before us. Empathy, gratitude, kindness, unity, bravery. Let's examine how well Harry embodies these values he is so eager to preach about. Empathy. Where was Harry's empathy when his grandfather Prince Philip was dying in the hospital and Harry was across the ocean filming content for Netflix? Where was his empathy when the Queen, in her 90s and freshly widowed, had to deal with the fallout of his Oprah interview accusing the family of racism? Where was his empathy when he published Spare, knowing it would humiliate his father and brother on a global stage? Harry talks about empathy as if he understands the concept, but his actions reveal a man utterly incapable of considering how his choices affect others. Gratitude. Harry was born into unimaginable privilege. He had wealth, status, protection, and opportunities that 99.9% of the world will never experience. He was given the best education, military training, and a platform to make a genuine difference. And how did he show gratitude? By complaining endlessly about how difficult his life was, by comparing his privileged existence to a prison, by writing a 400-page memoir detailing every perceived slight and grievance. That is not gratitude, that is entitlement masquerading as victimhood. Kindness and unity. Harry lectures about being kinder and more united while he spent years actively dividing his family. He pitted himself against William. He positioned Meghan as the victim and the royals as villains. He chose sides, drew battle lines, and then acted shocked when bridges burned. Reports suggest he still refuses to take any responsibility for his role in the family breakdown. He genuinely believes he is the wronged party, which requires a level of delusion that is almost clinical. And bravery, Harry loves to talk about bravery, but there is nothing brave about what he has done. It is not brave to trash your family from the safety of California while they cannot defend themselves due to royal protocol. It is not brave to sell out private conversations for millions of dollars. It is not brave to abandon your duty and then complain about the consequences. Real bravery would have been staying, serving, and working through difficulties privately. Real bravery would have been protecting his grandmother's final years instead of adding to her burden. The cruelest part is that Harry seems genuinely unaware of his own hypocrisy. He writes these words about empathy, gratitude, and action as if he embodies them, as if his life reflects these values. Sources close to the situation suggest Harry has rewritten his own history so thoroughly in his mind that he actually believes he is the compassionate one, the misunderstood hero trying to do good in the world. Here is what makes Harry's Remembrance letter particularly telling about his current state of mind. This desperate clinging to British identity and military credentials is happening precisely as everything else in his life collapses spectacularly. Heart of Invictus, his Netflix documentary about the games he cannot stop talking about, flopped harder than anyone predicted. Viewership was dismal. Critics were unimpressed. The show barely registered in streaming charts. It turns out people are not particularly interested in watching Harry position himself as the savior of wounded warriors. The broader Netflix deal is reportedly on life support. Meghan's cooking show has been delayed repeatedly. Sources whisper that Netflix executives are deeply frustrated with the lack of compelling content from the Sussexes. They paid millions expecting explosive revelations and A-list glamour. What they got was lukewarm documentaries and projects that fail to generate buzz. The golden couple of streaming is looking more like fool's gold with each passing month. Then there is Meghan's lifestyle brand. American Riviera Orchard launched with much fanfare and has delivered essentially nothing. Jars of jam sent to celebrities, Instagram posts about cinnamon sticks in hot water. The whole venture feels amateurish and desperate, more like a hobby than a serious business. Industry insiders suggest major retailers are not interested. The brand has no clear identity, no compelling products, and is trading entirely on Meghan's fading celebrity rather than any actual value proposition. And then there is the marriage itself. Reports are surfacing about increasing tensions between Harry and Meghan. Word on the street suggests they are living increasingly separate lives. Meghan is obsessed with her social media presence and business ventures. Harry is spiraling into this weird British military nostalgia. Sources close to the couple claim there are arguments about the children being photographed, about Meghan's constant need for attention, about Harry's inability to move forward. So what does Harry do when faced with this catastrophic collapse? He wraps himself tighter in the British flag and military identity. He writes letters about remembrance and service. He announces trips to Canada for Invictus events, carefully timing them to clash with William's Brazil tour. He is desperately trying to prove he is still relevant, still royal, still important. but the harder he tries, the more pathetic it appears. Royal commentators are increasingly using the term cosplay royal to describe Harry's behavior. He is playing dress-up with royal identity while having none of the substance. He announces tours as if he is a working royal. He issues statements through spokespeople as if he represents the crown. He lectures about British values from California. It is all performance, all theater, all desperate attempts to cling to an identity he voluntarily abandoned. Palace insiders suggest King Charles is under mounting pressure to strip the Sussex titles entirely. Harry is damaging the institution by association. He is confusing the public about who actually represents the monarchy. He is cheapening royal identity by treating it like a part-time gig he can pick up when his Hollywood career stalls. The response to Harry's Remembrance letter has been swift, savage, and absolutely unforgiving. British social media exploded within hours of the letter's release, with veterans, royal watchers, and ordinary citizens united in their contempt for Harry's audacity. Twitter became a battlefield of brutal takedowns, each more cutting than the last. One viral post summed it up perfectly. Harry lecturing us about service is like an arsonist giving fire safety tips. Veterans groups were particularly scathing. Multiple military charities issued carefully worded statements that amounted to polite rejections of Harry's performative patriotism. One retired colonel was quoted saying that Harry's letter reads like it was written by someone who has completely lost touch with the realities of service and sacrifice. Another veteran tweeted a side-by-side comparison. Harry's words about duty next to a screenshot of him and Meghan at a Hollywood premiere. The contrast spoke volumes. Royal commentators tore the letter apart line by line. They highlighted every contradiction, every moment of hypocrisy, every example of Harry preaching values he has demonstrably failed to live by. Television segments dedicated entire segments to dissecting the audacity of a man who abandoned his post, now lecturing about remembrance. Radio phone-ins were flooded with callers expressing disgust, frustration, and disbelief that Harry thought anyone would buy this transparent rehabilitation attempt. Even more telling is what happened in the comment sections of news articles about the letter. Thousands upon thousands of comments, and they are almost uniformly negative. People are not just disagreeing with Harry. They are expressing genuine anger at being lectured by someone they view as a traitor to his family and country. The sentiment is clear. Harry burned his bridges, and now he is shocked the ashes do not lead anywhere. Palace insiders, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that senior royals are deeply frustrated by Harry's continued use of royal identity for personal purposes. Sources suggest there have been multiple conversations about whether the king needs to take more decisive action. The problem is that Charles still holds out hope for reconciliation, but Harry's behavior is making that increasingly impossible. Every letter like this, every cosplay royal appearance, every lecture about values he does not embody makes the gap wider. What is particularly striking is that even Harry's former defenders are starting to abandon him. Media outlets that once gave him sympathetic coverage are now publishing critical pieces. Commentators who tried to see both sides are running out of patience. The narrative has shifted from troubled prince seeking his own path to hypocritical celebrity exploiting his heritage while destroying it. That is a devastating change in public perception, and it may be permanent. British bookmakers are even taking bets on how long until Charles strips the Sussex titles. The odds keep shortening. The consensus among royal watchers is not if it will happen, but when. And letters like this Remembrance Day message are only accelerating that timeline. Harry is not rebuilding his reputation. He is cementing his legacy as the royal who had everything and threw it away. And here is where we arrive at the most disturbing conclusion about Harry's Remembrance letter. The question that keeps haunting royal watchers and mental health experts alike is this: does Harry actually believe what he is writing? Has he rewritten his own history so thoroughly that he genuinely cannot see the contradictions anymore? Or is this calculated manipulation, a cynical PR strategy designed to rehabilitate a shattered reputation? The truth might be somehow worse than either option. Sources close to the situation suggest Harry is living in a bubble of his own creation, surrounded by yes people and PR professionals who tell him what he wants to hear, married to a woman who reportedly reinforces his victim narrative and encourages his grievances, cut off from family members who might provide reality checks. In this environment, it is entirely possible Harry has convinced himself that he is the wronged party, that his actions were justified, that his family deserves the punishment he has inflicted. Psychologists who study self-deception point to a phenomenon where people who make catastrophic life decisions must continually justify those choices to themselves. They cannot admit error because the cost of that admission would be too devastating. So they double down. They create elaborate narratives where they are heroes, not villains. They rewrite history until the new version feels true. Harry's letter reads like a textbook example of this process in action. But there is another layer to this tragedy. Harry's entire support system has crumbled. Reports suggest his marriage is under severe strain. Meghan is focused on her business ventures and social media presence, barely acknowledging him publicly. His Netflix career is failing. His celebrity friends have quietly distanced themselves. His family will not speak to him. He has no real purpose, no meaningful work, no community. All he has left is this constructed identity as a British military advocate, and he is clinging to it with the desperation of a drowning man. The saddest part is that Harry could have been genuinely valuable to the military community. He could have been a bridge between the monarchy and veterans. He could have used his platform for real good. Instead, he chose Hollywood money, celebrity status, and public revenge against his family. And now, watching William thrive in his role while Harry flounders in California, the jealousy and regret must be eating him alive. Hence the desperate letters. Hence the cosplay royal tours. Hence the increasingly unhinged attempts to prove he still matters. Royal historians suggest Harry will ultimately be remembered as the prince who had everything and understood nothing, who was given every advantage and squandered all of it, who could have been a beloved figure but chose to be a cautionary tale. This remembrance letter will not be seen as a touching tribute. It will be archived as evidence of a man so lost in his own delusions that he could not see the bitter irony of every word he wrote. The final betrayal is not what Harry did to his family. It is what he has done to himself. And unlike his family, Harry will have to live with those consequences every single day. So what do you think? Is Harry genuinely delusional enough to believe his own hypocrisy? Or is this just desperate PR damage control? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this level of royalty is what you are here for, smash that like button and subscribe, because trust me, the drama is only getting started. The next video is waiting, and you will not believe what is coming next.